afternoon, I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today we're going to be examining Stadium Mania. That was the process by which virtually every college town from 1905 to 1925 built themselves their own Roman Colosseum. Didn't have to be that way though, because in the beginning there was just college football. And where was it played in the 1870s? Well, on Ivy League campuses. And why Ivy League campuses? Because they were the only guys with enough time and money to devote to a frivolous activity like playing college football. But the public noticed and the public said it was good and the public wanted more. So soon there was college football teams up and down the East Coast. By the 1880s, there were college football teams in the Midwest with go as far as field as Ann Arbor, Michigan and Chicago, Illinois. By the 1890s, they were playing on the West Coast with teams in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington. And where did they play? Well, initially they were just playing on little 3,000 to 4,000 seat stadiums on rickety wooden stands. But that wouldn't do because the law of supply and demand was about to kick in. What do I mean by that? Well, did you know that from 1870 to 1900, the per capita income in the United States of America virtually doubled? It went from, well, a family of five in today's dollars in 1870 was living on $25,000 a year. By 1900, that was over $50,000 a year. They now had the money to spend on goods and services and products they wanted, and they wanted college football. Well, let's begin our story. Let's begin our actual story looking at stadiums with the original. With the Roman Colosseum, completed in 1880 by the Emperor Vespasian and seating up to 65,000 people, it was a modern marvel and actually the largest stadium on earth before the 20th century. Now, you might not like the sports that were being played there, mass murder on an industrial scale, but we got to give them credit for being able to, empty the building in about 8 or 9 minutes as fast as you could do it in a modern stadium. They had all that fluid dynamic stuff worked out to get crowds out of the stadium in case of emergencies. We're going to start our American adventure here with the University of Pennsylvania, the Quakers. Got a wonderful photograph here of the 1878 Pennsylvania Quaker football team. There's only 15 guys on the team, so everyone's going both ways. There is an interesting fellow, I assume, is the manager in a stovepipe hat. You got to love a guy in a stovepipe hat. He looks very dapper here in 1878. But where were they playing? Pennsylvania in the 1870s, 80s, and early 1890s were playing at a facility called the University Athletic Field. Could seat but it started off with nobody, but by 1894 it could seat 8 or 10,000 people. And we have an article here from the Philadelphia Times of May 13th, 1894. And it says, monster crowd present. It was there for the York, Pennsylvania baseball game. And there were about 10,000 people crowded into the stadium. We got a photograph. We have a drawing here of the athletic field. There were 10,000 people in attendance for the game. They had to close the gates early because of the rush. They figured they turned 400 or 500 people away, and that was the largest crowd in the history of the University of Pennsylvania. But the fact they had to turn people away means they're turning revenue away, and nobody likes doing that. So they immediately started thinking about building a bigger facility. Philadelphia Times, March 1st, 1895. Penn's new ground. The plan for Franklin Field is now definitely settled. They started designing and constructing Franklin Field, which still exists today. It says here, the final plan for Franklin Field, the university's new athletic field, was yesterday decided on by the Franklin Field Committee. Gotta have a committee if it's a university. And instructions were issued for its immediate outlaying yesterday afternoon. The work will consist in laying out the diamond and track and getting the field and cinder path in condition for the coming season. Well, the coming season included the Penn Relays. University of Pennsylvania was big in track and field, but they were also big in football. The field. Franklin Field is a multi-purpose field. It's got a track around the interior. It can because of the size of the track, you can actually have baseball played in there as well as football. So and lacrosse. Virtually every sport would be able to be played at Franklin Field. It was built in stages. When it originally opened for the Penn Games of 1895, it only sat 5,000 people. But the permanent stands were under construction, and they would be finished by around 1905. We have a photograph here of a lacrosse game between Cornell and Penn, and you can clearly see the lower deck of Franklin Field has already been completed. And at that point in time, it would probably have seated about 20,000 people. By the time they finished the lower deck in 1920, it can accommodate 40,000 people. And by the time they finished the upper deck, by the end of 1926, it can seat 65,000 people with accommodation in a crunch for up to as many as 78,000 people. Now we have a picture of a wonderful picture, overhead shot of Franklin Field. Today, the University of Pennsylvania University used to be a football juggernaut. They produced many fine professionals. The last of the great pros out of the University of Pennsylvania was Chuck Bednarik, the original or the last remaining two-way player in the National Football League, playing center and middle linebacker. He graduated in 47, which was the last time University of Pennsylvania ended up in the top 10. Today, they only draw 3, 4, 6,000 people a game. It's kind of sad. They seem sort of lost in the middle of this giant stadium. But our next university doesn't have that problem. That's Harvard. Harvard, I can't stress how big a deal Harvard was in the early 20th century. From 1900 to 1920, them along with the University of Michigan and Notre Dame were probably the big three. Harvard has always been a school with a lot of money. Now they've got a $60 billion endowment, but even back then they had big money. How big? Well, in March 1903, it was announced that the class of 1879 would present the university with a 40,000 seat stadium in horseshoe shape, 27,000 permanent seats, and 15,000 seats that could be constructed later if demand required it, and demand would require it. It was an early example of steel reinforced concrete. Stadium still exists today. Crazily enough, I've said this so many times in our talks that things move very fast in the late 19th, early 20th century. The stadium was substantially completed in 4.5 months. It was ready for business with a capacity of 20,000 in just that time. It would take the rest of the year to finish the whole thing off, to get it up to the 40-some thousand seat capacity. The stadium itself was the first unipurpose stadium. It was built just for football. If you look at a photograph of Franklin Field, the distance from the first row of seats in the lower deck to the field is 35 yards, 115 feet. If you look at an overhead of the Harvard Stadium or any of the unipurpose stadiums, the first row of seats to the field is only about 35, 40 feet. It's much closer. You're on top of the action. But that led to a little bit of a problem here in 1905. 1905 was a critical year in college football. There were like 18 deaths. There had been multiple deaths every year, and there was a movement afoot to ban the sport in its entirety. Teddy Roosevelt gets involved, and that's a story on its own. They make some proposals to basically want to spread the game out. It's turned into a game of just scrum on scrum, and guys are getting killed. To spread the field out, they've introduced the forward pass. People are now able to use the entire field. And one of the proposals they had was to actually widen the field. Make the field wider, give the teams more space, more room to maneuver, kind of like a Canadian Football League field, which is the size of a soccer field. And that would have been an amazing idea if they'd enacted that, because I've always said that if you played Canadian football rules, but with the quality of American professional athletes, the game would be spectacular. Barry Sanders would have ran for 300 yards a game. But they couldn't do it. And the reason they couldn't do it is Harvard's field, because it's so tight to the field, could not be expanded. And them being the most powerful school in America, they vetoed the proposal. But if that proposal had been enacted, it would have changed the game and for the better. The first activity that went on at the Harvard Stadium was the commencements of 1905. And we have an article here from June 24th, 1905 in the Boston Globe. It says, "Glorious day at Old Harvard. Many thousands take part in the celebration of the class of 1905. And it has a nice photograph here in the June 24th story of the event being held in the end zones here, and the stadium all done up in its bunting. One of the interesting things about, we'd mentioned that the stadium was built to seat 25,000 people, but with additional capacity for 17,000 more. The article of the Boston Globe of November 25th, 1905 shows us that in photographic form. It says, "Harvard Stadium, where today's football battle will be fought," showing location of seat sections. And what you can see here clearly is the horseshoe-shaped stone and cement Harvard Stadium, and then the extensions that are made through the one end zone. Those extensions became permanent. Quasi-permanent, and were with the stadium until 1951 when they were removed, and now it's back to its original horseshoe shape, seating about 25,000 people. With respect to the opening in the first football game that was held at Harvard Stadium, we have the article of the Boston Globe, Saturday, November 25th. It says here, "Completely surrounded by a horde of nearly 43,000 persons, solidly packed into Harvard's great stone stadium and its temporary stands and tiers reaching from the ground to a height of 50 feet. The last back row of spectators forming a flattened ellipse nearly 1/2 mile in circumference. The Harvard and Yale football teams will meet for their annual struggle this afternoon at 2. That is interesting that it's nearly a half mile around the upper edge of the stadium. So there it is in its 43,000 seat configuration. And what happened in the first game on November 25th, 1905? Well, Yale won 6-0. The home team lost. After all that preparation and all that construction, it didn't prevail on the field. But Yale would eventually have its day. Harvard would eventually have its day, but not on that date. Now, we have a nice picture here of Harvard Stadium from above, showing its current horseshoe configuration. The last three stadiums we're going to look at are all bowls. They're the great bowls. Bowls are what give those football games played in December and January their name. The Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl are named after our first stadium, the Yale Bowl, to be followed by the Rose Bowl, to be followed by University of Michigan Stadium. The first of the great bowls was Yale Bowl. Yale Stadium. It's an interesting concept here. The stadium is actually 54 feet from the playing field to the top of the stadium. But all three of these stadiums were built the same way. They were dug into the ground. So Yale Stadium, while it's 54 feet high, only 27 feet of that protrudes above the ground. The rest was hollowed out, and then that's used as part of the embankment. And the stadium is actually built compactly below ground. It was originally built. Well, you know what? Before we get into the construction, why do you need a stadium of that size? They're going to build a stadium here with seating for up to 70,000 people. Did you know that in 1914, the total enrollment at Yale, including undergraduates, graduates, and teaching staff, was only 3,000 people? Think of that, a 3,000 person university needs a 71,000 seat stadium. That just shows you the impact that the liquidity of having money in the hands of middle class people has in their demand for entertainment. And that's what this is. It's a 70,000 seat entertainment venue. Now the building was designed by Charles Ferry, and it's a beautiful structure, but it has a few quirks. It was built without any women's restrooms, and it was built without any locker rooms inside the stadium. The teams actually have to change at a field house about 200 yards away, and they walk to the stadium. They call it the Bulldog Walk. But even till today, there are no real changing facilities within the stadium. They've corrected the lack of washroom facilities, but it still is unique in that regard. The stadium was so unique that, the Boston Evening Transcript of November 18th saw fit to provide basically a map of the new stadium and how to get there and what to do. We have here the etching of approaches to the new Yale Bowl. And what I noticed here was that in addition to the men's and women's washroom facilities, 4 of each, which are located outside the stadium, not inside the stadium, you have a west parking field and an east parking field. So this is the first stadium that's got allowances for automobiles. Now, did you really need it? Well, in 1900, there were only 8,000 automobiles in the United States. By 1914, there's over 1 million. And I would be willing to bet that the automobile ownership rate for Yale graduates was 10 times that of the general public, so that virtually everybody who attended Yale was an alumni or faculty, would have had automobiles and would have needed to park them. Here's the parking lots, first ones ever. The article in the Boston Globe of November 1st, 1914 says, Yale's Great Bowl ready for the Harvard game. It says here, the Yale Bowl, where the next Harvard-Yale football game will be played, has a seating capacity of about 61,000. And it did have a capacity of 61,000, but they made allowances for additional seating, and it's explained in the next article, the New York Times of November 2nd, 1914. Enlarged Yale Bowl for 70,000. Extra seating capacity required for the Yale-Harvard game. All seats reserved. So here we're back to that argument of supply and demand. There's even more demand than 70,000 seats for this game. The Boston Globe explains it further on November 2nd. Yale Bowl extra seats, 7,000 to be built on the rim of the structure. Expect 70,000 at Yale-Harvard game. It says an announcement was made today that on account of the great demand for seats for the Yale-Harvard football game, additional seats to accommodate 7,000 people will be built at once on the rim of the bowl. There will also be accommodation for 3,000 or more persons to stand. The Yale authorities estimate that at least 70,000 people will attend the contest. Now, with that completion and the additional seating, we finally have a permanent sports palace with a greater capacity than the Roman Colosseum. It's the first time. Here it is. It's the Yale Bowl, 71,000 seats. And That hadn't been done in 1,840 years. Well, it certainly is an accomplishment, and it's not the final say in the size of football stadiums in America. A little bit of commentary, though, on whether or not this is all money well spent. It says here, if the Yale Bowl is inadequate, this is from the Boston Globe of November 3rd, 1914. If the Yale Bowl is inadequate to seat the crowd that wishes to go to the Harvard-Yale game, what are the poor colleges to do? The bowl is the last word in the stadium craze and the limit of expense as well. You know what? Not even close. But what you should keep in mind is this. They're building a 70,000-seat stadium in an America that barely has 100 million people. The population of the United States is now 3 times what it was in 1915. So to get the equivalent today, how the Yale Bowl impacted America at that time, you'd have to be building a stadium with 210,000 seats. No one's thinking of doing anything like that, but they were in the early mid-1900s. And what did the public think about it? Well, here's an article from the Boston Globe, Sunday, November 15th, just before the Harvard-Yale game, 1914. It says here, Harvard-Yale game will be the greatest spectacle in American sports. It says the Crimson and Blue 11 will find 70,000 persons looking down upon them when they trot out of Yale's great bowl next Saturday. And then how the teams shape up. But they're describing it as the greatest spectacle in American sport. And it is true. Nothing like this has happened. Baseball teams, I looked at the attendance figures. Baseball teams at that time are averaging 5, 6, 7,000 a game. You might get 20,000 at a big game before the 1920s, but you're getting 70,000 people to college football games. And what happened at the game? Well, basically the same thing happened at the Harvard game, but in reverse. It says here on Sunday, November 22nd, 1914, Yale's Waterloo. First battle of the bowl is no battle at all, but a rout from first whistle to last. Harvard winning 36-0. And in fact, it was the worst defeat in the history of Yale football, was the opening game at the stadium. Got some great atmospheric shots here in the Boston Globe article of Sunday, November 22, 1914. It says here, Harvard cheering section of the bowl showing a huge white H. Kind of a irregular white H. Says here, Coolidge making 95-yard run, longest of the game for touchdown in second quarter. Well, they had a 95er in that game. It would have been exciting to see. It was not filmed to the best of my knowledge. And then we have a wonderful picture, overhead shot of how Yale Stadium appears today, which is basically exactly how it appeared in 1914. Going out to the West Coast now for the Rose Bowl. Now, the Rose Bowl is the only stadium that we're going to talk about that's not directly affiliated with the university. It's part of the Tournament of Roses parade, and it's owned by the city of Pasadena. But it was built because of demand. Again, supply and demand. The original Rose Bowl games were played out at Caltech in a wooden stadium that was eventually expanded to seat 40,000 people, but it was basically a fire trap. So in 1922, they decided to build a new modern stadium out in the Arroyo Seco region of Pasadena. It was originally designed as a bowl, same as the Yale Bowl and same as the Michigan Bowl that we're going to see in a second. But it was not fully completed by the time of the first Rose Bowl game. It was still horseshoe shape in design then, seated in about 57,000 for that first game. When that stadium was enclosed, it would seat 88,000. It would be expanded over time to where by the 1990s it was seating 104,000 people. Now the first Rose Bowl game played in the Rose Bowl took place on January 1, 1923. And the headline of the Los Angeles Times is Trojans' terrific punch earns hard-won victory over Penn State. They beat Penn State 14-3 in the first Rose Bowl in the Rose Bowl Stadium. First Rose Bowl overall, played back at the old Caltech Stadium, was won by Michigan 49-0 over Stanford. And we have a picture here of how the Rose Bowl sits at present. It presently is the home field of the UCLA Bruins and hosts soccer games and all other manners of athletic activity. Now we move to the Midwest for our final stadium, and that's the Big House. Well, the Big House it's the largest stadium now, the largest stadium in the Western Hemisphere, and the third largest stadium in the world. Michigan football back then, though, was a big deal, as big a deal as Harvard. Fielding Yost had those great point-a-minute teams in 1901 to 1906, which were averaging 60 points a game. And when you hear today the statistic mentioned that the University of Michigan has more wins than any other team in college football, that to a great extent has to do with the success of Michigan football from 1890 through to about 1920. Fielding Yost originally wanted to build a new stadium with 140,000 seats. He felt he could fill it. He was satisfied. He had to be satisfied with the Michigan Stadium that was completed in 1927 with 88,000 seats. Before that, they've been playing in Ferry Field, which you could cram 40,000 people into its rickety wooden stands, but that just wouldn't do for a program with the following of Michigan. So the stadium is completed in less than a year. And it's open for business. How much business, though? The thing that you really have to appreciate. If you've got 100,000 fans, and back then the average ticket price was $1.50. It was $2 for seats down by the field and $1 up by the rim. So $1.50. That's the equivalent of about $45 a seat today. If you've got 100,000 seats, that's $4.5 million in gates for each game. If you're playing 5 home games, that's $22.5 million. That's just the gate receipts. That doesn't take into account the concessions, the parking, the radio rights, which by 1927 were real. The money is coming in the millions, and the money is going out in the dollars. All you've got, what is your expenses in a 1920s football team? You've got the head coach, you might have 4 or 5 assistant coaches, but you don't pay the players anything. This isn't like the New York Yankees that got to pay Babe Ruth $80,000 back in 1927. All they're getting is all is an education, but what they're getting is it's costing the university only the marginal cost of having 85 athletes sit in or not sit in on some lectures. What do they have to do? Hire, like even mathematically, hire 3 or 4 professors extra to accommodate those 85 people? It's peanuts considering the amount of money that's going in. And players, until 5 years ago, got none of it, not a penny of it. They got the opportunity of an education. I mean, that I guess is a wonderful thing. I don't know what SEC graduation rates were like in the 1930s, but I bet it was fairly low. But I know the money was coming in the wheelbarrows. So big stadiums are needed. The building of Michigan Stadium is the first time I've seen a tie-in like the modern times. When everybody wants to build a stadium today, they want government grants, tax breaks, say it's going to bring in $100 million in extra business activity. That was done in the construction of Michigan Stadium. Here's a headline from the Detroit Free Press, October 16th, 1927. Ann Arbor, prosperous and growing center. Commerce executive says stadium is a big factor in development. And they talk about the same things, that it brings in, bringing in 80,000 people on the weekend. Heck, Ann Arbor only has 25,000 people, and it's hosting 100,000 people for a football game. Those people are coming from somewhere. They're talking in the article about how they've got to have special trains and special commuter rates because the people that are watching the game are coming in the 50 miles from Detroit. And the thing that's bringing them to Ann Arbor to spend their money is the stadium. This is the first time I've seen that argument used in stadium construction. Now, when the stadium opens, it's a big deal. It's the greatest stadium in America. And the Detroit Free Press has here, famous coaches pay tribute, and all the coaches around the country are saying what a wonderful stadium it is. And it says here, the G.F. Fiddlewaite, who's the coach at Wisconsin, says the University of Michigan and Fielding H. Jost are to be congratulated and commended in the highest terms on this occasion. This building program sets the pace for the remainder of the country and shows what can be done in a constructive way in athletics. It is a big deal. It's an amazing freestanding stadium in the middle of the country. And here we have a congratulatory note in the Detroit Free Press, October 22nd, from the J.L. Hudson Company, which is basically Michigan's Macy's. It says, congratulations on the occasion of the dedication of the new Michigan Stadium to Fielding H. Jost, the fosterer, to the U of M alumni, the subscribers, and to the people of Michigan, the inheritors. It says, on behalf of the people of Michigan, and likewise, we would like to express a word of commendation of the University of Michigan alumni and other friends of the university who have undertaken financial responsibility for this great stadium project and kindred undertakings. Well, the first game that's played in the Michigan Stadium is not a Michigan-Ohio State game. It's a Michigan-Navy game. It's fun. It's fun because of the photographs that accompany it. But what happened was Michigan beat Navy 27-12 on November 12th, 1927. It says here, the Middies have edge in yards gained from scrimmage. Teams are even on first downs, but apparently there were a bunch of turnovers, and that cost Navy. Great photographs. It says here, top Gilbert gets away below Lloyd off on his 85-yard run. Now, Gilbert looks like a hale and hearty young man, but you got to have a look at Lloyd. Lloyd, who carried the ball 85 yards for a touchdown, appears to be a 57-year-old sailor. That cannot possibly be a young boy in his teens. Anyways, Michigan's off and running with a victory over Navy. Here's a picture of the stadium as it sits there in all its glory today. Fascinatingly enough, remember we mentioned that the Yale Bowl was 27 feet down, 27 feet up of 54. The Michigan Stadium is built even further down. It's like 2/3 down, only 1/3 up. And the problem is that they got down so low that depending on the year, you're sometimes into the water table. And it was a devil of a time getting grass to grow in Michigan Stadium. They eventually had to go to AstroTurf, then they had to go to Field Turf. The grass, even, they were buying the seeds from Michigan State University, who has a great agricultural program, but they couldn't even get those Michigan State seeds to grow in Michigan Stadium. Now, just as an aside, because just 2 weeks after the Michigan-Navy game, something happens in Chicago that's worth noticing. Chicago Tribune, November 27, 1927. 117,000 see Notre Dame win. Trojans fall 7-6. Notre Dame played the USC Trojans at Soldier Field. We have a picture of Soldier Field. Played them, and Notre Dame won 7-6 in front of 117,000 fans, and that remains, to this day, the largest number of people ever to see a football game, professional or college, in the history of the United States. So there we are. We've completed our tour of Stadium Mania. We've showed how these giant stadiums sprung up across the country to accommodate the demand that was created by the excess wealth created by the Industrial Revolution. It's all tied together, folks. But I need to relax. So let's go to the Yale Club in Manhattan and have a Yale cocktail. Such a thing actually exists, and it's pretty good. What we're going to do here, it's 2 ounces of gin, 2 ounces of blue curacao, and the blue curacao is an orange liqueur. Why they dye it blue, I don't know. 1/4 ounce of maraschino liqueur, 1/4 ounce of lemon juice, and 2 dashes of bitters. Now, because you got the lemon juice, you got to shake it, not stir it. So in your shaker, fill it with ice, shake it for 20, 30 seconds, get the proper temperature and dilution, then strain it into our chilled coupe glass, our favorite glass, that 1930s champagne glass, and garnish with a lemon twist. Sit back and enjoy, and try to find a good college football game on TV this weekend, all right? All right, so we'll see you in a week or so's time. Remember to like and subscribe. Subscriptions are incredibly important in the development of the channel. And we'll see you down the road with another slice of history. Take care, everybody.